Do you have any questions?
Hey, Francis, I have a question here. Just, so yesterday you were talking about the two channels of knowing, the sort of outward channel of knowing objects and perceptions, and then the channel of knowing oneself, I guess, as universal consciousness.
No, the channel through which we know that we are conscious. Don't make it complicated.
Okay.
Because if you say the channels through which we get realized, then if you believe that you are not realized, then you don't. This channel seems like a mystery to you.
Right.
Whereas if you say the channel through which I know that I am conscious, you know that you are conscious, so then this channel is available to you.
Oh.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought
free of
that,
charge.
Yeah. I guess I was curious if there is a point where, how do you say, that second channel of knowing I am consciousness, does it, how do you say, does it bleed into the first channel? As in, like I'll look out into the world of objects and see myself.
If we take the metaphor of the lion who believed to be a sheep, so this lion has two channels, the one through which he knows the other sheep, or sheeps, no, sheep.
No, sheep. Yeah, sheep.
Sheep. And the one through which he knows himself as a lion. He knows his strength and his roar and whatever. Before he discovered that he was a lion, these two channels were available to him. After he discovered that he was a lion, these two channels are still available to him. Have these two channels merge in one single channel? Yes and no. Yes, because in fact, ultimately, there is one single channel, which is consciousness. Because it is through this single channel of consciousness that he knows both the other sheep and also himself. Right? The distinction is that although ultimately it is the same knower of both, he knows that he is a lion directly, whereas to know the other sheep, he needs his eyes, his sense of smell and touch, etc. So he knows the other not directly, not immediately, but his knowledge of the rest is through his body-mind. Okay. So that's why I say yes and no. The channel through which consciousness knows itself is immediate, and the channel through which we know the world is, and the mind, it is not immediate, although it is the same knower at the end of that knows both. But what happens really, if I continue the metaphor, is that when the wolves arrive, what has changed is then the lion, knowing that he is a lion, is not afraid of the wolves, and the wolves don't approach him because they know he is a lion. Right? Whereas when he used to believe to be a sheep, he was afraid of the wolves. So that's which has changed. Nothing has really merged with anything, but it is simply the belief to be a sheep which has disappeared. And as a result, the fear has disappeared.
So you mentioned something about perception not being immediate?
By immediate, I mean, I use immediate not in the term of not immediate in time, but in the philosophical term, meaning of without an intermediary.
I see. Thank you.
You know, it comes from medium, which means something in the middle. Medium means middle. Immediate means without something in the middle.
Gotcha.
Mediate means there is something in the middle, in between.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
When I investigate and look for the separate self, I cannot find it within myself. And yet, and so I'm convinced it doesn't exist, and yet I continue to have the experience of other people. And or the belief seems to get resurrected, or there's some, perhaps the belief is still there, or it comes up in social interaction. I'm wondering if the experience of other people is evidence of ignorance, or if that's just another phenomenon.
No, because you cannot deny that there are other sentient beings.
Right.
The ignorance is when you believe that the consciousness is different for each sentient being.
Okay, and so if sentient beings are sort of coming up to you and telling stories about themselves as a separate entity, or about me as a separate entity,
well,
what do I make of that?
Okay. If someone comes to me and does this and says, I am Napoleon, what do I make of that?
Okay.
I'm not a psychiatrist, so.
Okay, I think I was getting worried because I thought that the fact that I was experiencing that could be evidence of ignorance, and there needs to be more investigation on my part.
Evidence of ignorance is fear, the presence of fear.
Okay.
Of psychological fear.
Okay. So, okay, thank you.
Worries, fear. So that's the best benchmark.
Okay.
But you said something that I want to perhaps express differently, because you say, when I look for a separate entity, I don't find it within myself, right? But that's not really how I suggest the investigation to be done. Because I know I am conscious. I know there is consciousness. And that's what I am. So, it is not like I am looking for a separate consciousness and try to find it. Because I am looking at this consciousness I know to be, which is hearing these words right now, and I am asking myself the question, how do I know that it is limited or separate? It's very different. In other words, I'm not looking for a consciousness which up until now I haven't seen, and which I cannot see. I am looking at this very consciousness which is looking, and asking the question, what is the evidence that it is limited? You see, it's a very different. Because in the first case, you remain in the blue. You don't find this consciousness, this separate consciousness, but whereas, because you don't know what to look at. But the way I describe it, you know very well what to look at, which is you have to look at that which is hearing these words right now, so that's very clear. And find out, by looking at it, whether it tells you somehow that it is separate or whatever. Whether from looking at it, you can derive some kind of certainty. Because by looking at it, already there are two kinds of certainty you can derive, that it is, that it is, at least one kind of certainty, that it is real. That you cannot deny the existence of consciousness and the reality of it. So already by looking at it, you can reach a conclusion. By looking at it in the same manner, can you reach a conclusion that it is limited? That for instance, that it began in time. You see, so that's just the little twist that I wanted to make to your question.
Thank you, that's helpful. And I just want to be sure I understood the first part too. So the fact that the experience of sentient beings telling stories of separation is experienced isn't evidence of ignorance in and of itself. The key is whether you believe it.
It may be evidence in ignorance in them, but not in you.
So the key is whether or not I believe those stories.
To be a separate consciousness.
Yeah.
Because if you believe to be a separate consciousness, you believe that there are separate consciousness, and the fact that there are separate consciousness is the very foundation on which they build their stories. Right? So, as you whatever you believe to be, so you believe others to be. It's only normal, right? So if you believe to be a separate consciousness, you see other people as separate consciousnesses. If you believe to be a human body, you see... It's a question of identity. What's your true identity? What's my true identity? It's identity politics at its best.
And so do we approach social interaction the same way, with the same attitude as thoughts and sensations, with benevolent indifference, or how?
You see other people as this consciousness. Talk to the consciousness in them. Talk to the intelligence, to the love, to the awareness. In other words, talk to them jumping above what they pretend to be. Talk directly to the consciousness in them. Don't talk to the person they want to be, they pretend to be. Talk directly to the consciousness. And another way is to talk to the child in them, talk to the innocence. And then you will have two kinds of reaction. There are people that are going to melt because the child in them has been touched, and you will see that people are going to get extremely angry because they will feel that you are showing them some form of disrespect because you are not buying their spiel. You see, you are not buying the game. They are acting in the sense of theater. For some people, you touch them, you jump above the ignorance directly to touch the child, and they open. Others, they don't like it because they know that you're not buying there. So they know their performance is not that great.
Thank you.
I have a couple things going on. I guess I'd like to start with the most immediate. So, it's like I forget what I've learned. When they had the microphone, there were very quick thoughts about, I'm not going to get a chance to ask what I want to ask. And then there's a tightening in here. And it's like I forget that I know I'm consciousness.
Yeah, but we can forget what we are not. But we can never forget what we are. So that's why this question of forgetting is there is no need to take notes. There is no need. It's nice to be a good student, to take notes and then to learn the lesson again. But there is a point when you know that whatever you understand during satsang is enough. It will have its impact down the road. It will find. It's like any drop of water that falls on Mount Everest at some point and ends up in the ocean. It's only a question of time.
So it's almost like don't even worry about what was just going on.
No.
Okay. So the other thing was this morning with Laura, somebody said that you had said that the body is just a thought. And I had a quick flash related to the sensation exercise from yesterday when it was like, or the other day when you said, imagine if you were a newborn before you had a sense of what the world was about, your body was about, and you'd have a sensation that there'd be like no location. And when I heard this, that the body is just a thought, I had an immediate image that this mind places like a scaffolding where then when a sensation happens, it assigns that sensation is in the shoulder scaffolding and this sensation is in the knee, and that's all just thoughts going on or images going on. And then the next thing that came up was, I guess the universe is just a thought. Not the actual existence of the universe, but how I look at the universe.
Yeah, let's put it this way. As an experience, what is the body experientially for us?
Sensations.
bodily sensations and concepts. And a few sense perceptions if I see my hand, right? It's an external sense perception, so that comes into the mix. But experientially, the body is concepts and sensations and perceptions. In other words, it's an object, experientially.
And if I didn't have any thoughts about the body, then I would just be
So
experiencing.
then the question that arises, does the body have an existence in the absence of its being perceived?
I wasn't really worried about that one.
Okay.
I was more like, I wonder what the body's like if I have perceptions and sensations, but no thoughts about it. No concepts about what it is.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's easy to experience. It is the experience you have of the body in the absence of thoughts. We don't think all the time. We all have experiences of bodily sensations without thoughts.
Okay.
It's just that if we think a lot, there is a lot of thoughts between sensations and perceptions.
Okay. Thank you.
I've been contemplating on your exchange with Caitlin yesterday.
About on what?
About one of your exchanges yesterday, where you said it's not enough to just know and experience that consciousness is one with the perception, is the same as, but you have to go further to kind of reconcile what about the world out there and to see the consciousness is the same as the reality of the world. And I was thinking that, so the first part, the experience is very clear. But the part about reconciling, that they're the same, what you said made sense, that obviously if they're interacting, they have to be part of one thing, whatever we call that. But I was thinking about what would be, how do I experience that? And this afternoon, when you talk about borderlessness, is that the experiential part of reconciling that I consciousness is the same as the reality of the world? What's the experience of that? How does one experience that?
There are two ways it gets revealed. One is a direct, immediate revelation, moment of understanding, intuition, because that's the intuition that there is only one reality. For some people, when they take these thoughts, there is only one reality, it remains something intellectual and they don't really, it doesn't reveal anything. But even if it reveals the truth of it, the next moment there is the world, etc. So we still need to cope with the residues of ignorance in the body. So the other approach is to conduct experiments, right? And as I said, to change, to realign the way we act, interact with others, the way we think, but also the way we feel the body and we perceive the world, and that's where the yoga comes into play. So the yoga is part of this set of experiments we are conducting. It's not the only one. That's why in India you don't have just this form of yoga, you also have karma yoga, right? Or the yoga of bhakti yoga, etc. So there are the yoga of feelings, jnana yoga, the yoga of how we think, of intelligence, etc. So we multiply the experiments in all realms of our phenomenal experience, in all phenomenal realms, basically. And we look at the outcome of this different way to think, to behave, to feel, to perceive, to interact. And then there is a body of evidence that grows and that annihilates the false evidence we believed to have that we were separate, that consciousness was not universal. Because the universality of consciousness, what I mean by the universality of consciousness is precisely that, is that consciousness is the reality of the physical world as well as the reality of mind. It is the reality, in particular, it is the reality of the body, because the body belongs to the physical realm, and of the mind.
So when you said the world is made up of consciousness, that comes from that second part.
The distinction, you say, you will see often people saying the world is made of mind. But, and often it is translated like that, you see. But I don't think that a sage would say the world is made of manas.
No.
You see, they would say it's made of Chaitanya or Atman, but not just of.
So if I understand this right, Francis, the first part is an actual experience. The second part is more of a revelation.
Yes, the first part is a direct intuition, which we all have to a certain extent. And because that's what takes us to pursue the truth. Mm. And we wouldn't if we didn't have this intuition that in our conceptual understanding of the world something is wrong, there is something fishy, and that's why we seek a resolution of contradictions, if you will, which can only be found precisely when we understand consciousness as a reality. Because otherwise this eternal problem of dualism that I mentioned, that what is the intersection between the mind and matter, will remain unsolved.
That's very helpful, thank you.
So the mind gets satisfied the moment this problem of mind and matter finds its resolution. And it has to find an harmonious resolution, and certainly the solution is not by saying everything is mind, you see, which we find too often.
So you just talked about two methods, or two possible occurrences, revelation or experimenting, working with what was an intuition and testing it and letting that body. What about contemplation on, so rather than a life-changing revelation that seems to not require a lot of work to follow up on, what about contemplation, like coming here or reading, looking inward at awareness, bringing oneself back to it as best as one can, usually with help from books or teachings, but so repeatedly getting as close to clarity, truth.
That belongs to the first type of revelation.
So that is a variation on revelation as a, yeah. Okay. So it's a valid path as far as you see.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Thank you.
But then the other aspect is important because it is really about living in accordance with whatever revelation we have got, not to leave it on the shelf, so to speak, but really to, or in the can, you need to eat the food.
Right. So revelation on its own is not enough, or it's not.
It's very important because it is alive. It is. But the experiment approach is important to get stable in it.
Right. Got it. I know I have trouble coming up with experiments a lot of the time. I mean, I know I should be, it's not that I should be, I want to, but designing the experiments doesn't come easily.
Well, but it's not difficult. For instance, the yoga we were doing is mostly experiments on the way. Right. In other words, the experiments are about changing the way we do something.
Right.
In order to do it based upon the assumptions that consciousness is universal. So, for instance, changing the way we perceive the world and the body to make it consistent with consciousness being universal. That's the entire definition of the yoga, if you will. It's this. If consciousness is universal, our real body, the body of consciousness, is the world. So the experiment is to shift the way we perceive the body and the world so that we can see the world, which is our immediate surroundings, in fact, as simply an extension of our body. You see? So, and then you can decline that in all kinds of exercises, each of which is an experiment. And at some point, the idea is that if you have done this experiment often enough, it becomes your natural way of perceiving the world and the body. It's not that at some point you stop making experiments. It's just the opposite. It's that your life is a constant field of experimentation. And since the reward of the experiment is always positive, you see, your life becomes always a celebration in which you, with gratitude, you receive the outcome of the experiments you conduct. So, and in a sense that with the mind you can never have a certainty. You see, because the mind is not a place of certainty. Consciousness is a place of certainty. So the bad news is the mind is not a place of certainty. Conducting experiment, it becomes a place of quasi-certainty. But the real place of certainty is in the now, the experiments we conduct.
So what I hear in that is that as your life becomes the experiment, and that continues to give you the certainty.
Yes. So I gave you an example about which is a very general a set of experiments. You know, the way we perceive the world and the body. I mean, there is a lot to do there. Right. You know, it's not like I wonder what Francis means when conducting an experiment. I cannot find experiments in my life. You see, every moment is an opportunity almost. And then, also the way we think, to make the way we think consistent with universal consciousness. In other words, meaning, every time we think along the lines of being a separate entity, just to change it, to halt this thought, and to say, okay, no, let's think as an experiment along a different perspective. You see? So the way we think, and then the way we interact with people, that's conducting experiment in love, and then the way, finally, we interact with the world at large, with the events that in our life, you know, to be open to the possibility that the universe is not our enemy, because if the universe is our real body, you see, then we enter into a cooperation with it rather than a fight.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
You have to raise your hand with.
But I think he's first, right?
Or sometimes if the mic is closer to you, it's more efficient. It's called mic jacking. Here we have experts here for that.
Francis, I would like one more time hear your explanation why on base of perception we cannot get any conclusion that about consciousness and nature of consciousness, especially on your metaphor, when is a smoke, we can say there is a fire, but you cannot conclude from this metaphor anytime perception there is consciousness, because still my experience every time is a perception, I can see perceiver and is consciousness. So how come this metaphor cannot work for?
What was the beginning of your question? Because I think there are two questions in your question. I've already forgotten the beginning of it.
The first is, how come I cannot get any conclusion on base of...
Yeah. So there are two different questions. I mean, of course, all the questions are related. The first refers to something that I said, which is the content of consciousness cannot give us any information on consciousness. Okay? And the second statement I make is that the fact that we know that there is consciousness, that we are conscious, that there is consciousness, cannot be attributed to inference.
Cannot.
Cannot. It's a fallacy to the statement we know that we are conscious because we infer consciousness from the presence of objects is a fallacy. So,
yes, this one I would like to explain.
So I start with the second one. We have to understand how the process of inference works. The example of inference is, if there is smoke, if I see smoke somewhere in the hills, although I don't see fire, I infer from the smoke that there is fire somewhere. That's how inference works. But inference doesn't work out of the blue. In order for me to be able to infer the presence of fire unseen from the presence of smoke, which is seen, it requires a previous accumulation of experience in which I have seen simultaneously fire and smoke. Right? Because let's assume someone came, an alien would come from a planet in which there is no fire or smoke. He has never seen fire or smoke in the past. He sees smoke. Can he infer from smoke that there is fire? He has never seen fire. That's the first time he sees smoke. And even if he lives in a planet full of smoke, but without fire, because the smoke over there comes from a different source, he has never seen fire. He comes here, he sees smoke. Will he say there is fire? He cannot. Why? Why can he? Because he has never seen fire accompanying smoke. Right?
So why is not work? Now I'm hearing your voice. Is a perception.
Bear with me. Let's not go. I'm not through.
Okay.
I'm not through. So you understand how the inference process works. Mm-hmm. Now, people say that it is impossible. The claim is that people make that it is impossible for consciousness to have the experience of pure consciousness. In other words, to see itself. And then, when we tell them, yes, but if it is not possible for consciousness to see itself, how are we so certain that there is consciousness? Then the argument that they use is because we infer consciousness from the presence of perceptions. But their argument is a fallacy because they make the claim that the direct experience of consciousness is never possible, that we never had it. So in this metaphor, the experience of consciousness is the analogon of seeing the fire for this alien, right?
I got it.
So, if according to their contention, that their contention is that it is impossible to see consciousness, but it is possible to infer it from the presence of perception. Inference doesn't work in this case because inference would require to have seen consciousness numerous times in the presence. Yes. Right? So that's the first. Okay. Now that you have that out of the way, the other argument I use is that the content of consciousness cannot give us any information about consciousness. And the argument is very simple. The connection between consciousness and its content is not a two-way street. It's a one-way street. Consciousness sees its content, but its content doesn't see consciousness. So if the content never sees consciousness, how can the content contain any information about the consciousness it never sees? You see? Therefore, the content of consciousness cannot give us any information on consciousness. Therefore, all information we get about consciousness can only obtained through the direct experience of consciousness, since consciousness cannot be inferred, and the content of consciousness tells us nothing about consciousness.
Thank you.
For instance, it's interesting because in the previous, my previous teacher actually used the fact that you can infer something about consciousness from what you perceive, and this is what we used to say when teaching in our introductory lecture. We say that, well, a thought is an impulse of intelligence and energy, and that the source of thought, consciousness, therefore must be an unlimited reservoir of intelligence and energy. So, in other words, what we perceive is a limited version, or an expression, a limited expression of an unlimited source. I understand what you're saying. That makes sense also.
Well,
is that wrong?
it's not very logical, because the first argument that we could say is, okay, if I have a tanker full of oil, right? And from this huge tanker, I take some oil to fill up the tank of my car, right? The fact that with this tanker we can fill up all kinds of cars doesn't imply that the tanker has an infinite capacity, right?
Right.
So to infer from the fact that a thought is a mix of energy and intelligence, however limited, that the source is unlimited, logically no, because it could just be bigger.
Okay.
And also, it depends on how we define intelligence. I connect intelligence to truth, and therefore to understanding. It's a particular mode of knowing. You see, there are other modes of knowing, which is just perceiving. You see, so I don't call that intelligence, but it's a question of semantics. People could define it as intelligence, which seems to be the case there.
Okay, a different question along the lines of recognizing that the world is made of consciousness, or for me, and tell me if this is a wrong approach, instead of saying consciousness, I say intelligence, because I can see intelligence in some ways is similar, maybe it's my background. I can see intelligence expressing itself here, and I can see intelligence expressing itself in every fabric of creation. It's not disorderly, it's very, very, so in that way I see a unity, a oneness. Is that a valid approach, or
Yes.
is...
The fact that there is order in the cosmos, the fact that there is already, the fact that there is something rather than nothing is already a miracle, right? The fact that there is consciousness is also another miracle. And the fact that there is intelligence is also a miracle, if we make a distinction between that and consciousness. And the conclusion is, well, if there are intelligent beings and conscious beings, if you will, in the cosmos, it implies that the cosmos itself is intelligent. You know, that's why this all this politically correct form of, you know, that the cosmos is stupid, only humans are intelligent, you know, and the rest is pure Darwinian, that doesn't jibe to me. You see, all these things which is being taught in schools by the left is ridiculous. And the thing which is taught by the right is equally ridiculous, that, you know, that the creation was created in what, in 6 days. Right. I mean, but the fact that there is intelligence, that there is consciousness, cannot be denied. It's so obvious. You see, so if there is intelligence in the cosmos, it means the cosmos is intelligent. You can tap dance around that as long as you want, but my teacher used to say, the plus more doesn't come from less. You see, in other words, intelligence doesn't come out of stupidity. Beauty doesn't come out of ugliness, etc. The abundance doesn't come out of poverty, etc. So, if the cosmos was completely devoid of any intelligence, it couldn't produce intelligent human beings. It's so simple. So there is something in between the left and the right there, you see. It's not really in between, it's above it, right? It's beyond that, in which there is a place for intelligence in the cosmos. So now I've lost all my crop on the left and on the right.
Thank you.
I wanted to go back to the personal story question to be sure that I understood what you were saying, because I do have this voice when people ask me and I'm sharing my story of like, oh, who cares? You know, why should I care?
About what?
About the story of my person, of culture, country, tastes, dislikes. But I am actually, but on the other hand, I am fascinated, and I find people's stories to be quite interesting. So what you're saying is not so much that personal stories are, oh, that, you know, that means ignorance, that if you are talking about your personal story, what you're saying is where you're coming from, right? And, because otherwise we would be a very quiet bunch. I mean, we would...
Well, perhaps we would be a quiet bunch living in the moment itself, enjoying the moment, which is a different way. Because the people in ignorance, you know, they have an implicit contract in their interactions, which is, I'm going to listen to your story, about which I couldn't care less, provided in return you listen to mine. So, in this way, if you listen to my story, which is about me as a person, you reassure me in my ignorance. You condone my ignorance, and my ignorance needs to be condoned, because ignorance is extremely fragile. And in exchange, I'm going to give a booster of energy to your ignorance. You see, it's a gentleman or lady agreement, you see, like that. And that's how so there are these exchanges among human beings that are total BS, you know, because it's constantly about the past, you know, my story in the past, your story in the past. Oh, poor you, oh, your husband did that to you. Oh.
That's mean, though. But wait, wait.
No shit. You say that he was sleeping both with his secretary and with the daughter of his secretary.
But you share your stories, and I don't think anybody's pretending that they're interested, you know?
But what is interesting, you see, is look what is going on right now. We are not talking about stories. We are in the now, we are having a good time. There is no need to bring the past to have a good time.
Wait, your story was juicy last night. When you were...
Yeah, but...
That was very nice. Celebrities, the restaurant...
That was to illustrate something. It's different. It's an illustration of something which is about the now. It's not about Francis in the past, you know.
But so you only have very profound conversations? I mean,
No, but I'm not saying... never to talk about the past. That's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
But to talk about the past is okay, provided it is meaningful in the now.
I see.
It fulfills its purpose. It comes spontaneously, and it's part of the celebration. But if it is only about reassuring this person that yes, you are a person. Don't worry. I have no doubt you are a person.
Thank you. No. Thank you. Perfect. That's it.
You know, and then it's all this modern bullshit about safe spaces, where people cannot be challenged in their belief systems because they identify so much with their belief systems that now everybody needs to be protected. So you have this guy who is 6'5". You know, and 250 pounds, and can lift, you know, huge weight, and who needs his safe space.
It's true. Thank you. It's true. I know. I totally agree with that. So can I just one more question? And it's not about the stories. So yesterday you were talking about, and I need repetition big time because I didn't get it. So you said that it's quite different to when you the statement, I'm probably going to butcher this, but the statement of there's only one reality and consciousness is universal. Did I do that right? I think
For me, this, I think what you may be referring to is that there are, if I say, understand I am consciousness, and consciousness is my reality, versus in contradistinction with I am a body, I am a man, I am a woman. No, I am this consciousness. But, and this consciousness is real, but it is not yet liberating this understanding, although it's a step, an important step in the right direction, but it is not yet liberating because it leaves open the possibility that there would be as many consciousnesses and realities as there are sentient beings. So the next step is to understand that there is only one reality. You see? So, and then, because then if there is one reality, and if consciousness is real, is my reality, then my reality is this one reality, and therefore it is also the consciousness and the reality of each sentient being. There is only one reality, we share this reality.
Very cool.
You see? Yeah. So that's the next step, and that's the liberating step, the moment we move beyond this limitation here.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm the closest to the mic. It makes, I start to get a sense of understanding from the inside out, like if I follow the path of what you're saying through my experience, and then if I opening my eyes, and then how I can see how the floor, I can extend into the floor, and the floor is part of me, and then the universe is part of me, if that's correct. I have a hard, but I have a hard time understanding logically the statement that matter is consciousness. Logically, it doesn't. I have a very hard time with that.
Okay. First, to clarify, what we do when we do these exercises, they are not really about understanding. They are not. What we do really, we work on the body-mind. The goal of this exercise is a deliberate attempt to reprogram the body-mind. The body-mind has been programmed over the years by ignorance, meaning because of the belief to be a separate entity, we have adopted ways of patterns of thoughts, but also behavioral patterns of movement and postural patterns that are consistent with ignorance, with what I call ignorance, the belief to be a separate entity. Now, these patterns, once the body has been programmed and the mind has been programmed, these patterns remain active. Over time, if we don't practice them, this pattern will get erased. But there is a more powerful way to erase them, which is to make a deliberate attempt to replace them with patterns that are more in line with truth, with consciousness being universal. That's what we do during the yoga. Right?
That's from the inside out that I was describing, right?
Yes, yes. We reprogram the body-mind. So we deal with the body-mind there. Now, regarding your question about, I have a hard time to understand that matter is made of consciousness. The first step is to discriminate between consciousness and mind. And mind is made of perceptions. And all perceptions, they are more like thoughts. They are thought-like, you see. So let's take thoughts. That which thinks the thoughts is not itself a thought. Do you understand that?
Yes.
So, that which thinks the thought, consciousness, that which perceives the thoughts, or that which perceives the perceptions, is not itself a perception. Right? In other words, what we are as consciousness, we are not a thought, we are not a bodily sensation, we are not an external sense perception. We are the one, the reality, who perceives all of that. Right?
Right.
So, by doing that, we are open to the possibility that consciousness belongs to a realm, that the realm of consciousness is totally different from the realm of thought and of perception. Okay? Because we have this wrong and old habit to think of consciousness as a thought, as being thought-like. So, once we understand this very simple statement, a thought doesn't think. The thought of a train doesn't think the thought, what am I going to cook for dinner? You see? A thought A doesn't think thought B. Consciousness thinks all the thoughts. Therefore, the nature of consciousness is utterly different from the nature of thoughts and perceptions. So then, here you have the mind, thoughts and perception, and now we have put consciousness somewhere else, discriminated it from that.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And now we look at matter. What do we mean by matter? You see, how do we know matter? We know matter through our senses, but our senses are extremely
Fickle.
treacherous, you see, delusive.
But there's more ways. Like, you're a scientist. There's scientists know matter very intricately.
I have something for you. A scientist doesn't know matter. That's a big question that will be forever, in the mind of scientists. That's the beauty of it. But scientists have a notion about a reality which is behind matter. Why? Because when you look at matter, you end up seeing nothing. Some kind of emptiness, levels of energy, but also something which is global, not something which is punctual, something which is kind of non-local at some point, and also matter doesn't create the laws that govern matter.
So it's not dumb.
What is extraordinary is that matter and nature has laws. It's not random. There are laws that are kind of simple and beautifully expressed mathematically. So that points to a reality that is beyond matter itself as we perceive it. So just as we have detached consciousness from mind, we detach reality from matter.
Yeah.
Conceptually. You see what I mean?
Yeah. The concreteness.
Yes.
We detach the concreteness of matter from matter.
If you will, yes, the concreteness. And not only the concreteness, but the localization in space and time. And
how did we detach the localization? When you look at the table very closely, how are you detaching that from space and time?
For instance, you take an electron in this table. You know, the atoms are made of protons and electrons and a few other. You take an electron out of this table, and you take an electron in a very distant star. They will have exactly the same mass, the same possible value for their spin, the same electrical charge. They will be exactly identical and interchangeable. Moreover, you can take two electrons or two photons here, and you have them traveling at the speed of light, taking photons. And they can be at huge distances, and they remain strangely correlated with each other, no matter how far they are.
Right,
That
even
if,
faster than the speed of light between them, right?
That if you measure the spin or along a certain axis of one of them, you will find that the spin measured along the same axis, the component of the spin along the same axis. On the other one, which is flying away, very far away, will be always exactly the opposite. So this correlation will remain no matter what. So that's one way to understand the globality. So there is an extraordinary interconnectivity of matter, if you will, throughout space and throughout time, that lead us to think of it as one single, omnipresent, and eternal, if you will, meaning beyond space and time, underlying reality. And implicitly, that's why what all scientists, they seek the laws of nature, somehow. How come that nature has laws? So in this way, when we separate matter from the laws that rule matter, and also matter from which seems to be local, and when you understand its non-local qualities, then you separate matter from its underlying reality. You see? So then this underlying reality has completely lost any weight, any of the qualities that we attribute to matter. You know, opacity, weight, mass, etc.
Independence.
Energy.
Independence of existence.
Energy, yes. All of that is forgotten. And just as consciousness has lost in this understanding any thought-like quality, limitation, in the same way reality has lost any matter-like limitation. And since consciousness, we know it's real, then that has opened the possibility that they are one and the same. You see? So that's, of course, an intellectual way to present it. But what we have is to revisit the acquired notions, simplistic notions often we have, of both consciousness, because we have never thought much about it, and we have put it in the same drawer as we put the thoughts. You see? And to revisit the ideas we have about matter and reality, because we have equated in a simplistic fashion matter with reality, or reality with matter. So then we separate them, and then they can be one and the same.
So this intellectual explanation, which is very helpful to me, is it true that this would be candy for the mind? This would
Yes,
feed the mind, be okay for the mind?
The goal of this intellectual argumentation is to dissolve intellectual belief systems.
Mm-hmm.
You see, that's
that are obstacles.
Yeah, that the goal is to be not knowing. Because we don't need to make this determination. Consciousness is reality.
But the discovery of the real truth is the inwards, the experiential discovery,
Yes.
not the
Yes.
intellectual.
It's as I said earlier, it's through revelation, but also it's through experimentation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
I'm wondering if it's valid to go the other way around. Although it doesn't lead a conclusion in my case, there's a question, which is, let's just take perception of visual object, visual perception, either with the model of photons or without. It's very obvious that seeing is occurring, even if what's seen is in doubt. And seeing is the visual senses that connects to consciousness. There's an ability to see, which is partly the nature of the body and the nature of the world, but clearly it's a part of consciousness as well. And if we have the idea of a seer here and a perceived thing there, at the moment of perceiving, they're meeting. And therefore, for them to meet, their reality is meeting. So you either go the way that everything's matter, which let's say we start with the object, light hits the object, it bounces off, photons enter the eye, they trigger electrical signals in the retina that goes to the brain, and somewhere magically, perception. The only way that actually works is if the photons are also conscious, so to speak. It doesn't make any other sense otherwise. You're always left with an unbridgeable gap if you don't have something that's the same thing. And that, to me, I'm trying to figure out why that's a bad explanation. It doesn't satisfy me. It's just sort of, I throw it away and say, who cares? I enjoy the view. But at some point, for me, the physics of understanding how things work on the physics level led to that question of, well, what's seeing what? And then it became obvious there can't be something else seeing that. That is seeing that always. It's there's not two. It has to be the same field at the end of the day. And I'm wondering why that's. I would love you to tell me where the hole is in that, because it seems so weak that it doesn't seem substantial.
You know, I don't think there is a hole in that. It can be. And if there is even if there is a hole that you see, I think this hole can be fixed, because the argument goes that way. Let's assume you say everything is matter, right? Then consciousness is a property of matter, right? So everything is matter. So then consciousness is matter, right? And the universe is matter. So everything is matter. So there is only one thing. Whether you call it matter, consciousness, then doesn't matter.
Right. And it leaves a sense of, it still doesn't give the idea of knowing oneself in the way of matter. You know yourself it actually goes the other way, as it turns the universe into a living universe.
Yes, exactly. And it leads to the unavoidable conclusion that right now it is the universe perceiving itself. It is universe / reality, matter, whatever you call it, conscious matter perceiving itself. But the moment you have a taken this step, you have moved out of the shack of this body. You know, you're already in your freedom, in your universal freedom. You see, so that's why I have nothing against materialism, provided this materialism is absolutely self-consistent. That at no moment comes a person which is not matter. You know? It has to be matter all the way, because then it's only a question of semantics. You can call it matter, reality, consciousness, whatever.
But it's not the Cartesian notion of matter. It's not, you know, Descartes broke it into two types of matter. One matter disappears. The cognized as a thing, fixed in space and time, dead, if you will, matter isn't found in that. It's just it's unknowable. It's kind of beautiful in a simple way.
I mean, physics is evolving. Someone sent me a paper about new an experiential verification of the no-go theorem, which is already we knew after Bell theorem and aspect experiment that if there is if locality is conserved and if quantum mechanics is true, that then it has to do with the strange interaction at a distance between the two photons I was talking about. That then there is no determinism, if you will. In scientific lingo, there are no hidden variables, no local hidden variables. But this new experiment, which is more complex, along the same line, but which puts together a Gedanken experiment of Wigner and the experiment of the EPR paradox, and it has been verified experientially that if we make the assumption that locality is preserved and that that observers have a freedom of choice in conducting experiments in two different parts of the universe, that then there is not a single consistent version of the events seen by these scientists. So it's very nerdy, but let's take an example of that. Let's take a spaceship that falls into a black hole, and there is an observer outside the black hole, and as the spaceship falls into the black hole, it gets completely destroyed by the radiation, etc. For the people who are the astronauts in the spaceship, when they enter the black hole, they don't notice anything. They enter the black hole. So their reality is totally different. So there is no one single version of it. There are two versions depending on the observer. Are you following me? That's kind of mind-blowing.
Yes.
You see what I mean? So we think the universe is this way and not that way, especially we know that at a microscopic scale, but at a macroscopic scale, with things like that are kind of mind-blowing. And the reason is that because once they have entered the black hole, they will never be able to communicate. So the two stories can never be compared and put together because they have entered two different universes. But so there is not one single. Huh? Okay. Just it has nothing to do with what we are talking about here. The only thing it has to do is this. If you think that what Francis is saying about reality is far-fetched, just study general relativity or quantum mechanics, and
Thank you. And I want to add, it's lovely seeing you dressed this way tonight.
That's Indian
It's
night.
very sweet.
I honor our Indian friends. And
I have another question I want to wait on.
You know what Osho said about India? He said, wherever there is love for the truth, there is India. I think it's a beautiful nationalistic definition. Okay, the last question, because we have to move on to the more celebration.
This should be really easy. It's just an odd, like a little iceberg that's formed in my mind today for some reason. Yep, I can hold it really close. A couple of days ago, you said something about how the now feels like it's squeezed between 2 seconds, but eternity's not squeezed by anything. And that's cool. I've been but today what hit me was, how does eternity interact with, the ticking watch? I seem to live in a place where there's sequential time. It does seem like that to me. Eternity seems very different. Like, it almost seems like two things that couldn't connect.
That which is the witness of time is eternal. Time flows in presence. Presence doesn't flow in time.
Okay. I'll have to marinate. Thank you.